I used to see her as nothing more than my mom's friend. Familiar, safe, untouchable. But one look, one moment too honest to ignore, shattered that illusion, and I realized she wasn't just part of the background of my life. She was about to change it forever. When I think back, she was always there, woven into the background of my life like a familiar thread. She was my mom's friend. The woman who came over for coffee on quiet afternoons, who brought flowers on birthdays, who laughed in that graceful way that filled the house without ever demanding attention. For years, I only saw her through the lens of childhood. Someone safe, someone reliable, someone outside the orbit of my own world. But adulthood changes your eyes. You notice things you never used to. The tilt of her head when she listened. How she leaned in fully, as though every word mattered. The way her perfume lingered. A subtle mix of warmth and spice that seemed to float in the air long after she'd gone. I remembered her kindness in small acts. Adjusting my tie at a graduation. Slipping me extra dessert when my mom wasn't looking. The gentle way she teased me for being too serious as a teenager. All these little gestures once felt casual, but now, looking back, they shimmered with a kind of intimacy I couldn't explain. When I saw her recently, after some years of living on my own, the shift was undeniable. She hadn't changed much. Still elegant, still carrying herself with quiet confidence. But I saw something new beneath the surface, something I had missed before. Maybe it was a flicker of loneliness in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. Maybe it was the way she carried her shoulders, like someone who had learned to hold the world's weight gracefully but had grown tired of it. She smiled at me when our eyes met across the room, the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times before. Yet this time it felt different, warmer, sharper, like it was meant for me, not just as a polite gesture to her friend's son. And in that moment, I realized that my memory of her, kind, dependable, untouchable, was too small to contain the truth of who she was. I found myself replaying old scenes in my head. How she used to brush a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was listening. How her hand, resting on my shoulder during a family photo, had felt steady, reassuring. Back then, I never thought about it twice. Now, those same details carried weight, a kind of electricity that seemed to hum through the spaces between us. She wasn't just my mom's friend anymore. She was a woman. A beautiful, complex woman I was suddenly seeing with new clarity. And as much as I tried to remind myself of the roles we were supposed to play, I couldn't unsee it. The distance between us felt both impossibly wide and dangerously thin, as though all it would take was one step, one word, for everything to change. That was the first time I felt it. The quiet pull, the beginning of something I didn't yet have the courage to name. It happened almost by accident. My mom had stepped out to take a phone call, leaving just the two of us in the kitchen after dinner. The clatter of plates had faded. The hum of conversation from the living room was muffled by distance. And suddenly it was just her and me in the soft glow of the overhead light. She leaned against the counter, glass of water in hand, and for the first time in my life I realized how natural it felt to be alone with her. We started talking about nothing that should have meant anything. She asked about my work, about how I was adjusting to being back home for a while. I asked her about her garden, about the stack of novels I'd noticed she'd been carrying around. Simple things, ordinary things. But the air between us felt anything but ordinary. Her voice had always been warm, but now I heard something different in it. An intimacy in the way she lowered it slightly when she asked me questions, as if she wanted no one else in the world to hear my answers but her. She laughed softly when I admitted how uncertain I still felt about my future, and she said something that surprised me. "You don't have to have it all figured out yet. You're allowed to take your time." The way she said it made my chest tighten. She wasn't just humoring me. She meant it. Her eyes held mine as if she understood more than she let on, as if she could see through the layers of confidence I tried to project and into the restless, searching part of me I rarely showed anyone. I noticed how close she was standing, how the faint scent of her perfume drifted between us, how the edge of her sleeve brushed my arm when she set her glass down. It was nothing intentional, maybe not even conscious, but it anchored me in place. I didn't want the moment to end. She asked me about books, and I told her about a novel I just finished. Her eyes lit up as she leaned in, listening with genuine interest, her hand resting on the counter just inches from mine. I found myself lowering my voice too, matching her tone, as though the kitchen itself had become a secret space, carved out of time. There was a moment, small, fleeting, yet unforgettable, when her hand shifted and her fingertips grazed the edge of mine. Neither of us pulled away immediately. We stayed like that for a breath too long, suspended in something fragile and electric, before she smiled softly and moved to pour herself more water. But I couldn't shake the feeling. It was just a conversation, just laughter, questions, and the brush of her hand. And yet, something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't simply my mom's friend standing in that kitchen anymore. She was a woman who saw me, who listened to me, and who, for a moment, felt impossibly close. When she looked at me before we rejoined the others, her eyes lingered in a way that left me unsettled and wanting more. It was a simple offer, nothing unusual on the surface. She had bags of groceries in her car and asked if I could help her carry them inside. I said yes without hesitation, though part of me knew it wasn't just about the weight of the bags. The evening air was cool when we stepped outside, carrying the first load together. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of stillness that comes just after sunset, when the last traces of daylight fade but the night hasn't fully taken hold. I could hear the soft crunch of gravel beneath our steps, the occasional hum of a car in the distance. And beside me, I could feel her presence more vividly than the world around us. Her arm brushed against mine once, twice, and neither of us shifted away. The touch was so slight, so easy to dismiss, and yet I felt it linger long after. I stole a glance at her, and in that dim light she looked softer somehow, less like my mom's friend, and more like a woman with her own quiet story written across her face. When we returned for the second trip, she slowed down and asked if I wanted to take the long way back to the house, just to walk a little. I agreed before she had even finished the question. So we wandered down the block, empty-handed now, the night around us stretching quietly. She began talking about her life in ways she never had before, about how friendships change as you get older, how people drift away, how sometimes you wake up and realize you've built a life so full for others that you forget to ask yourself what you really want. There was no self-pity in her voice, only a gentle honesty. Still, I heard something vulnerable in her words, a softness she rarely showed. I listened more carefully than I ever had, not just nodding along but holding on to every word. And I think she noticed, because when she looked at me, her eyes didn't just search. They rested, as though she found comfort in my attention. The streetlights bathed her face in a warm glow, and for the first time I realized how beautiful she looked when she let her guard down. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't wearing her usual polished composure. She was simply herself, and it was disarming. Our arms brushed again, and this time I let it happen. My hand almost ached to reach for hers, but I held back, afraid of crossing a line too soon. Still, the silence between us felt alive, charged with something neither of us dared to name aloud. When we finally reached the house, she paused at the door and looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Her smile was soft, touched with something unspoken, before she turned the key and stepped inside. That walk was nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would have noticed. But for me, it was the moment I stopped pretending she was just part of the background of my life. She was moving closer, step by step, and I was powerless to resist. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that the conversations, the walks, the way her hand had lingered near mine were all harmless. But deep down, I knew something had shifted, and so did she. One evening, it was just the two of us again. My mom had gone upstairs to rest, leaving us in the living room with the low murmur of the television playing in the background. She sat on the couch with her legs tucked beneath her, the lamplight casting a soft glow over her face. I sat nearby, trying to act casual, though every part of me felt aware of her, of the quiet between us, of the boundary we both knew existed but hadn't yet spoken aloud. She asked me about my plans for the future, the kind of question adults often ask, but her voice was different, gentler, more personal. When I admitted I wasn't sure where I was headed, she smiled faintly, as though she remembered being in that same uncertain place once. "You'll figure it out," she said softly. "You're more capable than you think." Her words should have felt comforting, but the way she looked at me made my heart stumble. It wasn't the look of a friend talking to her friend's son. It was something deeper, something that lingered too long to ignore. Then it happened, small, fleeting, but unforgettable. She reached up to brush a loose strand of hair away from her face, and as she did, her eyes caught mine. For a second, it felt like the air thickened, like time slowed down. My chest tightened, and all I could think was how close she was, how easy it would be to close the distance. She lowered her hand slowly, and when it rested on the arm of the couch, it landed close enough that my fingers nearly touched hers. I froze, every nerve in my body alive with the possibility of that inch of space closing. But I didn't move, couldn't. I think she sensed my hesitation, because her expression softened, almost as if she wanted to reassure me. "You've grown up so much," she whispered, her eyes tracing my face in a way that made me feel both exposed and seen. That line, the invisible one we both knew was there, suddenly felt paper-thin. The television continued to play, forgotten. The whole house seemed to shrink until it was just her and me, locked in a moment that teetered dangerously between right and wrong, safe and forbidden. And yet, neither of us crossed it. She leaned back slightly, as if pulling herself away from the edge, and I followed her lead. But the tension didn't disappear. It only deepened, like a tide pulling us closer no matter how much we tried to resist. That night, when I went to bed, I couldn't stop replaying the scene. The look in her eyes, the almost touch of her hand, the soft murmur of her voice that felt meant only for me. I told myself it was nothing, but I knew better. The boundary was there, yes, but it was no longer holding us back. It was daring us to see how long we could pretend it mattered. It was late when it happened, later than usual for anyone to still be awake. My mom had already gone upstairs, the house wrapped in that quiet stillness that only comes at night. I was in the kitchen, rinsing out a glass, when I heard her footsteps behind me. She didn't say much at first, just leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching me with that soft half-smile of hers. There was something different in the way she looked at me, though, less casual, more deliberate. The silence between us stretched, warm and waited, until I finally turned and asked if she couldn't sleep. She shook her head, then stepped closer, her voice quieter than usual. "No. Just thinking too much, I guess." I wanted to ask what about, but the way she said it made me hesitate, like the answer wasn't something to be tossed casually into the night. She reached for the counter near me, resting her hand down close to where mine was still braced against the sink. Our fingers didn't touch, but they didn't have to. The space between them hummed. "I used to see you as a kid," she said softly, her eyes never leaving mine. "But you're not a kid anymore." The words landed like a spark, igniting something I had been trying to deny for weeks. My breath caught in my throat, and I couldn't look away from her even if I wanted to. Her hand shifted then, closing that last inch of distance, her fingertips brushing lightly against the back of mine. It was such a small gesture, but it broke everything open. I froze, not because I wanted to stop her, but because the touch was so unexpected, so intentional. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint shadows under her eyes, close enough to notice the way her chest rose and fell with each quiet breath. "You look at me differently now," she whispered, and I felt the truth of it ripple through me. Before I could speak, she lifted her hand to my cheek, her touch feather-light, her thumb grazing just beneath my eye as if she were memorizing my face. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I swear the entire house disappeared in that moment. "I shouldn't," she murmured, almost to herself, yet her hand didn't move. "But I can't pretend I don't see it anymore." I could have pulled back. I could have laughed it off, changed the subject, broken the spell. But I didn't. I stood there, caught in her gaze, caught in the honesty of her touch, and let the moment take me. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was more powerful than one. It was the shift from silence into acknowledgement, from hidden glances into something undeniable. She wasn't just my mom's friend anymore. She was a woman standing in front of me, showing me with one simple, trembling gesture that the boundary we both feared had already been crossed. And in that instant, I knew my world would never be the same. The house felt impossibly quiet after that moment in the kitchen. I lay awake for hours, the ghost of her touch still burning against my cheek, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't untangle. By morning, I told myself maybe it hadn't meant what I thought. Maybe it had been nothing more than a slip of impulse, something that would vanish if we ignored it. But when I saw her again the next day, I knew better. We ended up outside together, sitting on the back porch as the late afternoon sun painted everything gold. My mom had gone out to run errands, leaving us with mugs of tea and a silence that felt far louder than it should have. She was the one who broke it. "You've been quiet," she said, her eyes searching mine carefully. I laughed under my breath, but it sounded thin, nervous. "So have you." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though her expression was serious. She set her mug down, folding her hands together in her lap. "Last night, I crossed a line. I know I did." I felt my pulse quicken, the truth of her words pulling everything taut. "You didn't," I said softly. "Or maybe you did. But I'm glad you did." Her eyes widened just slightly, as though she hadn't expected me to admit it out loud. She looked away for a moment, gathering herself, then turned back to me with a vulnerability I had never seen in her before. "Do you understand what this could mean? What people would think? What your mom would think?" I nodded, my throat tight. "I've thought about all of that. And yeah, it scares me. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel what I feel when I'm with you." Her breath caught, and she pressed a hand to her forehead as if trying to steady herself. "You're so young," she whispered, her voice fraying at the edges. "And I should know better." I reached for her hand then, slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Our fingers intertwined, and once they did, neither of us let go. "Maybe you should," I admitted. "But that doesn't change the fact that you see me, really see me, and I can't go back to pretending you're just my mom's friend." Tears shimmered faintly in her eyes, though she blinked them away quickly. She squeezed my hand, her thumb brushing against my skin in a tender, almost desperate rhythm. "I've thought about this," she confessed, her voice low. "Longer than I should have. I kept telling myself it was wrong. But," she trailed off, shaking her head. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the weight of everything we just admitted. We sat there, hands bound together, hearts caught between fear and truth. For the first time, neither of us was pretending anymore. And even though the risk hung over us like a shadow, the honesty between us felt like light breaking through. After our confession on the porch, nothing could go back to the way it was. The silence between us was no longer made of uncertainty. It was made of truth. A truth we couldn't hide, even if we tried. That evening, after my mom had gone to bed, we found ourselves together again in the living room. Neither of us had planned it, but there we were, the soft glow of the lamp throwing golden light across her face. She sat at the far end of the couch at first, hands folded tightly in her lap. I sat on the other side, my chest heavy with words I wasn't sure I was allowed to speak. Finally, she broke the stillness. "This can't be simple," she whispered, as if the quiet walls might judge her. "If we choose this, we'll always be walking a fine line." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, searching her face. "I know, but not choosing it doesn't erase what's already here. It doesn't make it disappear." Her eyes glistened, conflicted and raw. "You deserve someone who can walk beside you without all this weight. Someone who doesn't carry years you haven't lived yet." I shook my head. "What I deserve is someone who makes me feel like this." My voice caught, but I didn't look away. "You make me want to be honest. You make me want to be better. And I don't care about the years between us. I care about you." Her hand trembled as she reached up, almost against her own will, to touch my face again. The gesture was tender, filled with both longing and restraint. "You don't make this easy," she murmured, her thumb brushing against my cheek. I covered her hand with mine, holding it there. Maybe it's not supposed to be easy. Maybe it's just supposed to be real. For a long moment, she simply looked at me, her gaze softening as though she were seeing me not as her friend's son, not as someone she had to guard herself against, but as a man she could no longer deny. Then she closed the distance between us. Not with a kiss, but with the way she shifted closer, sitting beside me, her shoulder pressed gently to mine. We stayed like that, the weight of the decision settling into something lighter, more bearable, because we were carrying it together. "We don't have to know what tomorrow looks like," I said quietly, my hand finding hers, lacing our fingers together. "We just have to know what this is, right now." She let out a shaky breath, then nodded, leaning her head against my shoulder. "Right now," she agreed, her voice softer than a sigh. And in that moment, it didn't matter how complicated the world outside might be. It didn't matter what people would say, or how uncertain the future felt. What mattered was the truth we had finally allowed ourselves to speak, and the quiet, fragile hope blooming between us. I thought she was only my mom's friend. But when she leaned against me, hand in mine, I realized she was something far more than that. Something I couldn't walk away from, no matter how uncertain the road ahead. If the story moved you, don't let it end here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced a moment where the heart wanted something the world might not understand? Your voice matters, and your story could inspire someone else to be braver with their truth. If you'd like to see more stories like this, raw, emotional, and unafraid of crossing lines, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter. And remember, love doesn't always follow the rules, but sometimes the rules are worth breaking for something real.